Hello everyone, my name is Derek Mitchell. I am president of the National Democratic Institute, and I will be your host for this DemWorks podcast. It's no secret democracy faces substantial challenges around the world. But while the challenges are great, we at NDI believe the opportunities are even greater. For more than 35 years, NDI has been honored to work with thousands of courageous and committed small d Democrats around the world to help countries develop democratic institutions, practices, and skills necessary for success. Over that period, we've worked in more than 150 countries. Through our DemWorks podcasts and videos, we're engaging in conversation with those who have been on the front lines of democratic development work around the world. They'll share what they do and how they do it, their on-the-ground experiences, the challenges they face, the obstacles they overcome, and the unique national context in which they must operate. And in the process, show how democracy works. This month, NDI is honoring risk-taking women. So today I am joined in conversation by Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister responsible for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, and who serves as point person within the Ukrainian government on promoting gender inclusion throughout society. Ms. Klympush-Tsintsadze is a political scientist and international relations specialist, directing several public policy institutes and foundations over the years in Ukraine. She has served as a correspondent for BBC Radio Ukrainian Service, and after securing undergraduate and master's degrees at home briefly, studied in the United States at Montana State and Harvard universities. She first served in Parliament in the wake of the Euromaidan Revolution of Dignity movement in 2014, when massive street protests in Ukraine's capital of Kyiv led to the departure of then-President Yanukovych, and snap presidential and parliamentary elections were subsequently held. She became Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine on April 14, 2016. Her personal story reads like a case study in Ukraine's trajectory when it comes to women's role in public life. We will discuss that and other matters over the next half hour. Madam Deputy Prime Minister, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
It is great to see you again. We first met last November, as you may remember, during my first visit to Kyiv. To observe the pre-election period. You had elections, presidential elections this spring. As we tape this, we've just come out of NDI's annual Madeleine Albright luncheon here in Washington, D.C., at which we celebrated women risk takers around the world. You shared your compelling personal story about risk taking. Can you share that story with our listeners?
Well, maybe I'll share a little bit different story from the one that I've shared on the stage. I think the risk-taking for many of us who have decided to go into politics after the Revolution of Dignity was basically the breaking ground to address the needs of the society and simultaneously reflect on the internal hesitation any of us who have come to politics from civil society or from business after the Revolution of Dignity. That is something that we had to go through, talking to yourselves, first of all, because I remember when I was offered a place in the party list to go and run for parliamentary elections back in 2014, that wasn't an easy take. It wasn't like, hooray, I'm going to run for the seat in the parliament. It was like, can I actually deliver after these deaths of people have happened on Maidan, after Russia has already started its attack and aggression at Ukraine, and after considering this for actually literally a couple of days, talking to yourself, you make the decision that it's time to take the responsibility, that you've probably matured enough to actually go and try to take the responsibility. Not without fear, not without question marks in your head how it will go. But I think that all those who have decided to do that, or most of those who have decided to do that in 2014, we all have gone a very long way, and can be both proud of a lot of things that we've achieved, but at the same time, we actually have also a lot of lessons to be reflected upon and learned after this 5 years of serving in the parliament and then in the governmental office.
What was it particularly difficult as a woman in that environment? Was the movement driven? Were there women leaders of the movement when you decided to step forward and say, I want to be a leader, a parliamentary leader? Was that difficult within the Ukrainian cultural context?
The difficulty probably runs much deeper. I remember myself being, 23, 24, when it was my first visit to NATO headquarters, along with a group of obviously men, because it was about defense and security matters. No young females were in analysis of the security and defense policies. And I remember, after having a very hectic and difficult day, being exposed to a lot of information in NATO headquarters, we sat down together as a group. And I've been given plenty of different compliments, being told how great I look today and how impressively beautiful I am. But after that, someone was saying, okay, now men, guys, gentlemen, let's go and talk business. And I had to persuade them that I actually had something to say specifically on the business, specifically on the issues that we've discussed and we've been exposed to. So I think that was basically first encounter of this difficulty, which I actually later on had to take as a regular challenge. I did not think that it could be different. And when I came to the parliament, actually at the beginning, I thought, okay, we've all gone through this type of things, and maybe we just have to work very hard in order to achieve something, and not necessarily provide for some additional instruments how to ensure that women are much more empowered in the Ukrainian society. And it took some learning curve through the parliamentary work and exposure to experiences of other countries to understand that actually we can help other women to go through such experiences much smoother, not to have such experiences of having to be dealt with on the gender base as opposed to professional basis. So therefore, I think that runs much deeper and much further behind in time.
Yeah, I mean, that's relatively later in life that you may have sort of woken up to the challenges of the gender issue. I understand. I mean, you were a political scientist and a national relations specialist, and not so interested in gender or focused on gender issues for much of your early career, I suppose. Is that right? And was this experience then the thing that turned you? Was there anything else that may have caused you to really say, I've got to focus on this specifically?
That was already in the parliament. I've joined the group, the Equal Opportunities Caucus, that has been operational already in the previous convocations of the parliament. And it was interesting because as you've learned the experiences of others, you understood that maybe there is some horizontal problem to that, as opposed to your personal story that you had to fight your way through the male-dominated area of security and defense. And so therefore, when you're sharing your experiences and when you are learning the experiences of other countries as well, then you finally get to the point that, that is the common problem that has much wider scope, and actually we have to address it together and have this commonality in response to this.
Right. So, I mean, what do you think are the greatest remaining barriers in Ukrainian society to getting where you need to get on gender, in your view?
We've done plenty of institutional work. We've changed rules, we've changed procedures, we've opened up professions to women, we've opened up the security and defense sector for women. We have been achieving incredible results over this 5 years. But at the same time, I think that stereotypes and prejudices are still part of our societal canvas, so to say, and some of the political parties or some of the political figures are trying to play on those stereotypes and prejudices, especially if you go further from the capital city, from big cities, and you go to the local and rural areas. And it's interesting that only when women see the kind of role models that can be followed, that they start to additionally kind of believe in themselves. At the same time, it's puzzling, because Ukrainian history actually tells us, if you go like 3-4 centuries back, that women have actually played pretty equal role with men before we have been conquered by Russian Empire and then have become the part of the Soviet Empire. So I'm assuming that we are just coming back to our roots right now in our culture, because the culture and the stereotypes and prejudices we have right now have come to us through actually this imperial intrusion that we've been part of.
Right. So it's we always talk about making progress towards modernity, and in some sense you have to go back
to roots, and at the same time and match it with modernity, because we have been we have been suffering on different levels from the this dominant position of the Russian Federation that it has been pushing on us over centuries, and right now kind of this movement for gender equality is coinciding with the movement of Ukraine for freedom, for the right to choose the path for the country, the right to be and aspire to become the part of the free nations family. And so for us, it's all together. It's about human rights. It's about personal rights. It's about countries' rights, nations' rights. So it's all together kind of streamlined in one very united effort.
You mentioned in the luncheon that women make up 54%, I think you said, of the population. So if you leave out 54% of the population,
exactly, if you don't build on their experiences, if you don't use their knowledge, if you and moreover, it's not only that we have this big number of population consisting of women. Out of women population in Ukraine, 65% of Ukrainian women have higher education. But that doesn't mean, unfortunately, that they are holding highest positions in the offices, in the businesses, in the public offices, in different fields. It has only been very much growing since after the Revolution of Dignity. And we finally actually have even first 2 women generals, which we are very proud of in the security service and in the law enforcement so far. Obviously, in the armed forces, where they have not been given this possibility of real growth through different stages for a while, we would have to wait a couple of years till till our lieutenant colonels and colonels, women lieutenant colonels and colonels, will be ready to actually hold the posts of general level. But I think that this is incredible what is happening.
Can I ask you about that? I mean, that is fascinating, the fact that the armed forces has opened up. I mean, that's usually the hardest institution to crack open. How did you do that? How was that accepted and acceptable in that culture to allow women to be in the armed forces as in a relatively equal basis?
Women have gone along with men as volunteers to fight for Ukraine, to defend Ukraine against Russian attack. But unfortunately, they were serving there and being registered as, cooks, as, holding supposedly very safe positions. But at the same time, they were snipers, they were artillery machine operators. They actually hold a very serious military positions. So we understood that actually already that is existing problem. They are there in the armed forces. They just do not get the same recognition as male military colleagues. And so therefore we had to fix it, and we had to actually make sure that their reality corresponds to possibilities. Right. And that kind of, so the actual actions, the actual deeds by women have driven this need to fix it on the legislative and on the executive level.
And as you suggest, and people should know, you are under a real serious immediate threat from outside. You don't have the luxury of saying, well, we have to leave some people behind when you need to defend your territory against an aggressor. So.
Yes, unfortunately, the threat does not go away. Unfortunately, Russian intentions and strategic goals of undermining Ukraine and its desire to build its own fate are being all the time tested by the Russian Federation through military invasion, through disinformation campaigns, through cyber attacks, through trade and transit war that we are experiencing all the time. So it means that the fronts for pushback against this attack are various, and therefore you have some women and men serving in the armed forces, but there are others that are taking courageous steps in the other areas in order to protect the country from the aggressive behavior of the Russian Federation.
As you mentioned, there's the physical threat from armed force, and then there's the sort of the gray areas, the hybrid threat, the disinformation, the cyber war that goes on. Can you comment about how you're seeing that done by the Russians? Is it how you're seeing it in your either personal life, your professional life, in the colleagues? How are the Russians going about this disinformation campaign, since we always talk about Russia or Ukraine being on the front lines of this challenge, and what Russia does in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine. They end up trying it in other countries. So
they
it's
are
very
testing out a lot of different techniques and methods of the hybrid attacks on the territory of Ukraine, and we do believe that we are already standing as a stronghold as the eastern flank of community of free nations like North Atlantic Alliance, and yes, we need another several-hour podcast to discuss all the techniques that they are using, but that goes from absolutely fake pictures that they would use, for example, from some movie that they would show as if that has happened, for example, in Ukraine, or they would take a picture from, let's say, Syria and would present it as something that is happening on the territory of Ukraine. So from very kind of primitive techniques to very sophisticated techniques like running Facebook accounts from the territory of Russian Federation, pretending that those are Ukrainian Facebook accounts, and calling for dismissal of the current authorities, or criticizing the actions that either the government or the parliament or the president is taking, for example, and spurring this dissatisfaction. Also, we see how the Russian narratives in Russian news about Ukraine, which are mostly we've looked at it. Predominantly 90% they are negative about Ukraine, and there are three major narratives that they are producing there: that Ukraine is a failed state, that Ukraine is an intolerant state, and that Ukraine is a corrupt state. And whatever is falling in the possibility of amplifying that message, that exactly gets not only to Ukrainian media, but also gets to international media. And whatever boring, but we believe great news of some successes, some specific things that we have achieved in Ukraine are happening. They are not necessarily making it to the front lines in any international media,
right,
or not to say the Russian media.
Yes. I mean, their strategy is to disrupt and divide. And one way they can divide is on gender. I mean, they try and use that as a way to divide society. Can you share how they do that in your society?
Absolutely, but moreover, Ukraine is not the end target for Russian Federation. It's to divide and rule and to divide and disrupt also the free nations of the European Union, yes, free nation United States of America, and others as well.
We are aware of that personally, yes. They've done
I'm sure States. So, unfortunately. Yes. Unfortunately. With regard to one of these real tactics that they are using to divide the Ukrainian society, they are trying to polarize us on the issue of gender equality, following the push on so-called traditional family values, as if gender equality is countering this family values, for example, and we are countering that with the narrative and of our own personal experiences of many women who are already in different public offices in Ukraine, that basically our ability to equally take responsibilities with our partners, with our husbands, with our colleagues in the offices, is actually making our families much stronger, much healthier, much more powerful, because they are based on partnership, they are based on support of each other, they are based on common shared values, and that's something that is lacking. This supposedly fight for the traditional values, and in Russian realm, traditional values are based on the book that was, if I'm not mistaken, produced in 17th or 16th century, so-called Domostroy, the book that actually provided for a very specific place for women, not really taking the lead in any of the even family matters, but actually being obedient to their husbands. And that's the only notion of the traditional family values that Russia understands. And so therefore Ukrainians are a bit different, but still we do have some part of the conservative society, and therefore those prejudices are being explored by Russia and are being also taken on some flags by some political forces, and they are coming out with a cohesive and coordinated action of attacks on our achievements that we have already made up to date in terms of gender equality. So it's not going to be it's not going to be easy in the future, and I'm recalling probably 2 or 3 years ago, Secretary Albright, she has come to Ukraine, and she has spoken about the need to persistently defend women's rights. And she said that if you stop at some point, there is a possibility of a pushback. And that's exactly what we see right now. We haven't stopped in Ukraine, but when we achieved something, we are receiving this pushback, also backed by Russian Federation.
Right. So what do you think is do you feel like the resilience is there in Ukrainian society, or what more needs to be done to push back against this threat in your view?
There is a resilience, and we can see this by the public opinion poll that has been conducted by the NDI, because I really think it's incredibly important to understand that more than 60% of the society believe that there is a need for more balanced representation of men and women, for example, in public offices, and that it's both men and women are receptive to this idea. So therefore, the demand of the society is of different nature than the one that we've discussed about this so-called traditional family values. I think for us it's very important to institutionalize all of our achievements in order to ensure that it's A, part of the law, B, it's accompanied by the information campaign about explanation to wider society why it matters and what it provides you with and how this is beneficial for the whole society. And D, I think that C, or whatever, and C, that that it is becoming a part of the usual boring tradition. Yeah. And I think for that matter, we need quotas. For that matter, we need even these temporary instruments that would allow us to leapfrog to a traditional behavior in terms of equal representation in different spheres of men and women. It's important for men to understand that unity and equality and justice is national security. You're more secure when you're unified, when you have equal rights and justice for everybody, then the society can withstand all kinds of pressures from outside. You are more resilient, for sure. You are more stable. You are more prosperous. You are providing for much more encompassing decisions, because you're looking from different perspectives on the same problem, and then you're getting the decision which has a much long-lasting nature in the future.
Your other responsibilities, we're talking a lot about gender, but you're also involved on Euro-Atlantic integration. So can you give us up-to-date sense of the status of EU and NATO accession for Ukraine? Where do you expect it to lead in coming years?
That has been also the case and cause of the Revolution of Dignity, that Ukrainians did not want to take the decision of the previous President Yanukovych of not signing the association agreement with the EU. So therefore, it's the societal demand to move to this to the membership in the EU and NATO, and therefore we are happy that we have managed to sign over these years the association agreement, to ratify it, to go into institutionalized and very structurized implementation of the rules and procedures and directives that have proven their efficiency in the EU countries in our Ukrainian practices. It's a huge work. The ambitious association agreement that we have with the EU is the biggest association agreement that the EU has ever signed with any other third country. So it's very close to actually as implementation, the early stages of the already accession to the EU. The only problem is we still do not have the promise of the EU,
right,
of Ukraine's European perspective. And I really think that we are lacking that political decision that should come from the EU responsibly of long-term engagement. So we are willing to build European state within Ukraine, but we also think that we are entitled to be invited to the EU if we are fulfilling all the preconditions. With regard to NATO, there has been a promise back in 2008 that Ukraine and Georgia will become NATO members, and the next step is MAP. Unfortunately, we have, for a number of reasons, we have not reached that point yet. But again, during the last 5 years, we have gone a long mile in the internal transformation of both security and defense sector, but also the whole spectrum of different areas where we needed reform. And I hope that, again, there will be enough sobriety and responsibility and readiness to accept that Ukraine, being already the eastern flank of NATO de facto, and being already contributor to security of the entire Euro-Atlantic community, that it has to become to be given the instruments to become a NATO member in the nearest future.
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful argument. Your newly elected president-to-be is famously a professional comedian. He has no formal government experience. He clearly has exceptional political skills. What advice would you give him as he prepares to take the reins of government? You've been in government for some time. This is a critical moment in Ukraine's political history. What kind of advice would you give him and his team at this moment?
Two advices, I think. One, no compromises on European and Euro-Atlantic integration, because it's a dream that we are fighting for and that we are dying for. And the second one, to base his team on professional, patriotic, and integrity-based people. And if we see that, I think that there is a way for success in with the new president, with the new team. And I'm sure that all the people that have put their effort, health, time, knowledge over this period of time to build new Ukraine, will only join their forces together with him.
Right. I mean, the energy of Euromaidan, the Revolution of Dignity, was about that clean government and economic opportunity, and the people haven't seen that.
And justice.
Enough, and justice. So at least they don't feel that in their lives. So clearly I would think anti-corruption would be at the top, and a sense of economic opportunity. But that's Easier said than done, I imagine.
Anti-corruption is extremely important, but also don't forget that first and foremost, we have to secure the statehood and we have to preserve ourselves to survive from the attack of the Russian Federation.
Indeed.
That allows us to have the country which we are building with the rules and procedures and transparency that we want to see, and the respect for the rights of every single person, which so much more matters in Ukraine. And that actually makes Ukraine very different from Russian Federation. Personality and person and human being matters in Ukraine, while in Russian Federation it's the
glory of the state.
And importance of the state matters. So there we are profoundly different.
Yes, and that is, I think, the challenge we're facing. Those who believe it's the glory of the state versus the dignity of the individual. Those are two fundamentally different visions for how we should be ordering ourselves, whether it's Russia or China or others. They talk about the glory of the state and the individual doesn't matter so much. But I think the common values that you suggest between the United States and Ukraine, very powerful in that regard.
That's civilizational choice, and that's civilizational divide, so to say.
Now, what is your political future, if I may ask? You have parliamentary elections, important ones. NDI will be observing those. I hope myself to be there in the fall, in October, if they happen in October, or maybe a chance of happening sooner. But do you intend to run? Do you have any thoughts about your political future yourself?
I do hope that we will be able to unite with like-minded people that both have some experience and have courage and have dedication and readiness to serve the country and serve the nation further in order to be present in the next parliament. I think it would be irresponsible to give up on the experience we've gained and to give up on the efforts that we've done in the structural, systemic, huge number of reforms that we've started. It's very important that we carry them on and we further build our ability to defend ourselves and to build the country of the dream. And I hope also, and I'm counting very much, that we will not be alone in this battle further, and we can count on our partners and allies across the world.
Let me ask you then one final question based on that. You have been a successful leader. You've risen in a challenging political environment as a women leader. How can those of us on the outside help support your country's continued development on that front, on the gender front, or just broadly to enhance the prospects of Ukraine's success?
I really think we need a conscious, long-term decision of our Western partners to stay engaged, to stay focused with Ukraine, which is, and continue to push together with those people inside the important change and transformation and reform agenda for the people of Ukraine, which both Ukraine and our allies will actually benefit from. Because if we are strong, if we are prosperous, if we are democratic, we are only going to enrich the free and democratic world.
Madam Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and share your remarkable story and perspectives. We wish you nothing, you and your country, nothing but success. And we look forward to NDI's continuing partnership in Ukraine's democratic development in years to come.
Thank you so much. And we are also very much hoping that NDI will stay as engaged and as motivated in Ukraine and with Ukraine.
We will. I think it's our biggest office in the world, one of our biggest offices. And certainly
we are a big country.
You're a very big country, and you're there. I can't think of one that's more important, to be honest. And I apologize to the other offices, but I truly do believe that. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. Share DemWorks, both our podcasts and our videos, on social media to amplify the voice of these democracy heroes. For more details about NDI and its work, including our new 35th anniversary report fresh off the presses, go to ndi.org. And while you're there, sign up for our monthly newsletter. I'm Derek Mitchell. This has been DemWorks. Thank you for listening.